Hi, this is Julie Murphy with Arizona Farm Bureau, and we are continuing our Arizona Glorious Wine series. And this is our 8th interview today with Kent Callaghan with Callaghan Vineyards right here in Elgin. So we had about a 2.5 hour drive to get here. It was a beautiful drive. I would highly recommend it for anybody coming up here. And Kent, thank you for allowing us to take you away from what you enjoy doing more versus
Thanks. Thanks for coming down. Yeah, thanks
you.
for your interest in the wine industry.
Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. So I'm going to kind of profile you to our listeners. Kent is a pioneering figure, I like to say, in the Arizona wine industry, recognized for founding Callaghan Vineyards in Sonoyta, Arizona in 1990.
Yeah,
right?
With my parents, yes.
With your parents.
Yeah.
And in fact, I was going to say that too, along with your parents, Harold and Karen Callaghan. Now, I'm sure when you guys first ventured into it in 1990, the world was your oyster and there was a lot that you were about to experience. So, but you're a third generation Tucsonian, and you initially studied philosophy in college.
Right.
That's kind of interesting. Sometimes you have to be philosophical when you're making wine, so maybe that's a good pairing.
Yeah, with the setbacks and things.
Yes. yeah, especially with the setbacks. And then, despite early challenges such as losing vines to a heat wave in the 1990s, you've persevered, you've adapted your approach, you've led to the creation of award-winning wines that have been served even at the White House. That's pretty cool. On 4 different occasions. Yeah. Not just once, but 4 times. With over 30 years of experience, you've become a respected vintner, focusing on Mediterranean and Spanish varietals with Tempranillo, Mourvedre, Grenache, and all of it tailored to Arizona's higher altitude and this desert climate. Callaghan Vineyards, now family run with your wife Lisa, is celebrated for its deep, flavorful reds and complex whites. You've earned accolades from critics like Robert Parker and recognized in competitions like the San Francisco Chronicle Wine Competition. You've been really busy in the wine business since
it's the only real job I've ever had, actually.
Well, it's been a worthy one because you're kind of considered a pioneer for this latest generation of winemakers here in Arizona. And then, so that's basically, even though I've alluded to it a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about your Genesis story, as I like to say it.
So, yeah, it was my dad's idea originally to get into the wine business. He had a summer house out in between Victoria and Vancouver on one of the Gulf Islands in BC, and his next door neighbor was a home winemaker. And I think the guy taught others how to make wine for a fee to kind of pay for support his habit. And so my dad started making fruit wines from wild raspberries, blackberries on the island, which turned out pretty well. 88 was a pretty good vintage for blackberry wine, as it turns out. But that's what he just enjoyed the process. And it was the same time that Gordon Dutt had had planted. He planted down here, I think in 79, 80, and they had a house down here, and they knew that there was as you might expect, a lot of media attention about the first wine grape vineyards since Prohibition, etc. So they knew that someone who had done a lot of research thought this was a great area to plant. So we really didn't look anywhere else, and they didn't. And they bought the parcel we're on now, I think in 88, and I graduated from college in 87, so it was a very short span out of college before we planted in 90.
Right.
So it was interesting. I didn't know anything about wine at the time, and neither did they really.
Yeah, and never looked back. And it's interesting. I didn't realize that, because you and I have had visits before, but I didn't realize that he was the one your dad was making the wine even before you.
Well, he was making home wine.
Home wine.
Yeah. And then we started this place, and we also started a restaurant at the same time. So unfortunately, he ended up spending more time with my mom at the restaurant.
Okay.
Yeah, and I ended up taking care of this place basically from day one. So yeah, we like to get into business. My parents like to get us into businesses we know nothing about, including restaurants. So it makes
But
life interesting.
but it does make life interesting. When you first started though, were you kind of a little skeptical or like,
Yeah, I was actually. That's an interesting. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yes, I was, and then I tried a bottle of '87 Sonoyta Vineyards Reserve Cabernet that completely changed my mind.
uh,
Yeah,
who was that from? I mean,
Gordon Dutt. It
okay.
was Dutt's wine.
Now tell us about him. I think he's been mentioned previously in
Yeah,
these 8
I'm sure he was. Yeah.
interviews that we've done, but he was an extension agent, wasn't he?
No, he was
No.
a soils professor.
Okay,
And
but
I
out
didn't.
of the U of A.
Yes, but he had come from UC Davis apparently. That's something I didn't know
Okay.
about until much later. But that's why the focus. They really so. Getting we're going to talk about this at some point, but the whole reason why Gordon and colleagues did what is now called the Four Corners Report, and effectively, I think the early to mid 70s, to multiple test plots of vineyards in all of the Four Corners states, not just Arizona, um, had the wines made at grapes. I believe they were shipped back, or somehow maybe they were fermented in each state, and then the wine was taken back to Campbell Farms in Tucson,
Okay.
the ag
Okay,
station,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that little building that's right next to the road was the winery.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah,
I
there
didn't
may
know
still
that.
be wine down in the basement. We raided it a while back, but that's wild. There's all kinds of stuff down there. But anyway, so they had trained tasting panels assess them for quality, and in his opinion, Gordon's opinions, the Elgin station or vineyard location produced the best wine on the Baba Kamari Ranch, which is owned by the Brophy family. Yeah, so
Yeah.
and I can't remember the name of the older late Brophy that I think it was Frank, can't remember, but they became friends, and that's where his parcel is actually was part of the Baba Kamari. But anyway, that's how it started. He planted in 79, 80 originally with some partners in that area, and that's where my folks really found out. The media attention I was saying about earlier. That's where they found out about it, and so they looked around here for land.
And because of those
Yes.
conclusions that
Mm-hmm.
Gordon made. So,
and the whole reason why they did that research is what I was trying to say, because Back to the Future in spades, but they were looking. Southwestern agriculture was getting hammered by low-cost imports. A lot of that was the cost of pumping water, so they were tasked by the U of A, I believe, to find low water use, high value added crop, and they actually only looked at wine grapes. So
makes a whole lot of sense. But again, you kind of came into this with a little bit of skepticism,
right.
And it changed when you had that glass of wine, and it was made here in Elgin, or
Right.
from grapes
Yes.
here in Elgin.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see yourself first as a farmer
Yes.
versus a winemaker? Okay.
Farming.
And why?
I think it's just I wasn't technically trained, so everything is pretty basic. And the farming is where you can't. I mean, you can. I guess the ultimate quality level of any wine is made in it. I mean, it's indisputable that it's maximal quality you can achieve can only happen from whatever you get. You're
Right.
not going to make it better by some kind of wizardry in the winery. So I've always focused on trying to make produce the best grapes that we can, and then it's just like having great ingredients as a chef or something, a cook. If you have great, Bianco is a great example of somebody
Yes.
who
Mm-hmm.
focuses psychotically on quality of ingredients, which is good for all of us, right?
And the end result is that we have wonderful food that we can imbibe in.
Yeah.
I think Rod Keeling interviews, you can, and I know I won't get it right because I always flip things around, but you can only make great wine from great grapes. You cannot make good wine from bad grapes, right? Yeah. So cool. I kind of got it.
Yeah, you got it.
So I'm going to stay on the farmer track. Given the extreme weather conditions in Sonoyta, though, gets pretty intense here, and a lot of windy days in the Sonoyta
Yeah,
area.
yeah, windy, and it's interesting. Heat is what everyone thinks is a problem, but it really isn't. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing when we were planting this vineyard, so that's one of the reasons why we had we were planting in June instead of early May, which is when we should have been planting. So, but despite that, these days the vineyard doesn't really wake up until it gets hot. So we have in our vineyard site, and it's not typical of the entire Sonoyta AVA, but here we can have frost. We got down to 34. I think it was May 18th.
Oh wow!
So it's cold at night, or much colder than you'd expect, and that's been one of the primary concerns. Late spring frost to some extent, but early or very severe first fall frost and hail. We've been wiped out in 2010 and 2020, both times. That's why we're now using hail nets, at least on they're expensive, so we're investing in them slowly. But we've got about 65%, 75%, or 70% of the vineyard covered at this point.
Someone told me, I'm not recalling who it was, that it's tougher to grow grapes here, even though it makes wonderful wine because it produces wonderful grapes, but that the weather here makes it a little bit tougher. Do you agree with that?
Yeah. So Sonoyta, of the 3 AVAs that are currently in Arizona, it's the highest average elevation. It's the coolest of the 3, and it has the highest rainfall.
Okay.
So, highest rainfall can mean 14 inches in, the monsoon season, which is goes right into harvest. So it can be, pretty brutal. 2014 and 2015 were incredibly wet. So we basically didn't produce much from those 2 vintages from our own vineyard. We also purchase fruit from Wilcox, friends in Wilcox. So it's kind of that's our insurance policy, and we always have.
If you get devastation here, and you've certainly are indicating you've had those experiences, you can get your wine grapes from the Wilcox.
We can stay afloat.
Which was causing me to ask another question. And then each one of the AVAs, which is the American Viticulture Area, that you harvest here first, and then or is it the other way around?
No, we're last.
Okay, so it's usually Verde Valley.
Verde Valley is generally warmer and lower, and then Wilcox, and then Sonoyta.
Yeah. So you're harvesting last. So when are you harvesting?
For any given variety.
Okay,
let's say that.
Yeah. When are you guys usually harvesting then?
Whites will start coming in probably 3rd week of August.
Okay.
And then finish up by the middle of September, 3rd week of September. Reds start coming in generally 10th, 12th of September, and go all the way into October, well into October, sometimes even November. We pick reds in November before.
Okay.
So it's pretty typical, actually, of a lot of the areas in, better known areas in California. It's not crazy dissimilar.
Yeah. And because of that, you're probably in the period where you're doing some of your serious pruning for the farming for your grapes here, right? Or are you done with all of your prepping the vines for new growth and clusters? Or I guess maybe what I should
You mean like manicuring?
Yes, thank you.
During the growing season? Yeah, where we're out there leafing and suckering, or still suckering to some extent, taking, opening up the canopies so there's airflow, because we know the wet weather's coming, so you want to make sure that they're well ventilated. It really cuts down on disease pressure and helps wine quality quite a bit too. A little more sun exposure on the fruit.
Okay. You've emphasized that wine potential is determined in the vineyard. Again, we're staying with the farming.
Right.
With Arizona's terroir playing a significant role. How do you describe the unique characteristics here in Sonoyta's AVA and the climate, what it's really doing to your wines? And how do you highlight this in your blends?
I think, and it's interesting because not a lot of people have made wine from, the better known folks have not made a lot of wine from Sonoyta grown fruit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So Todd at Dos Cabezas and James at Rune now, and both of them basically, from what I have heard directly from them or seen, all say the same thing. They're growing in Sonoma as well, and the fruit. My take on it is that Sonoma grown fruit typically, the fruit characters in the background and the structural components, earthy structural components, tannin and acid, are more to the fore. So
Okay.
it's more Europe. They tend to produce more European style wines. They're dense. They tend to be pretty dense because our yields are lower here,
Okay.
and also because we're higher in elevation on average. So you're getting the grapes protection from the sun is, among other things, increased tannin.
And I think that's reverse if you go up to the Verde Valley.
Yeah.
The fruits
And
are more
Wilcox too.
fruit forward.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So is that not cool? And I'm learning that because Michael Pierce was talking about that, and he was trying to describe the distinctions between the three AVAs. So truly, wine is about place, to keep quoting Eric Glomsky, and it's about what you do in the vineyard. It really is about what you do in the vineyard.
Well, yeah, unless you're doing, this is the other reason why I don't do crazy stuff in the winery, is that, if the only way you can strip character from a wine, it's very difficult. You're not really adding it. You're not adding character generally. Maybe marginally through use of oak, possibly, but you can strip character from a wine. Even a wine that starts out could have been great. There are definitely ways you can screw it up.
Wow.
Yeah, and make it taste like something from anywhere else.
Yeah, and I kind of get into a question on that, but so what strikes me is that maybe when you're making the wine from the wine grapes, if you really want it to represent place, be simplistic in your approach to it.
Well, that's my
your
theory.
philosophy.
Yeah, right. That's
so
what
cool.
I try to do. Yeah.
Your vineyard focuses on Mediterranean Spanish varietals like the Movedra, the Tempranillo, the Grenache, and you've moved away. Is this correct, from Syrah and Zinfandel? Do I have that correct?
Yeah, Zin was terrible. Graciano is actually the Spanish variety I think is the best, and not just here, but almost in any. If there was a silver bullet for Arizona in general, it would be Graciano.
Okay. So how do you balance that experimentation with the consistency, or because your philosophy is simple, maybe you stay away from that? But what's your take on that?
Well, we definitely have vintage variation too, on top of experimentation that I'm doing. But I suppose there has been a lack there. Certainly maybe in our middle period, there was a lack of consistency because there was a huge amount of experimentation going on, and not just varietal change, but different. Trying to figure out how to farm well here has taken longer than it should have. My learning curve is flat, apparently, but
hey, but you were persistent.
there you go.
Yeah,
it's hard-headed. Yeah, so that's now I definitely have settled on some varieties that will always probably be here. We're still experimenting a little bit, but the blends and the bottlings that we're doing do follow a certain consistent line or way of thinking or making wine.
Cool. And you are the winemaker for your wines, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about your simplistic approach. You're relying on minimal intervention. I took notes on this. I want to make sure I get this right. Traditional methods like aging, and because I read this somewhere, lees. So I want you to explain what that is.
Spent yeast.
And what is it?
Yeast.
Okay.
Ferment, and it's something that white Burgundy has always been known for, and it's kind of spilled over into just about everything everywhere else. At least not everybody does it, but I use it with reds, and I think most people are leaving red wines on the lees for some fairly significant amount of time, whereas in the old days, and I'm sure some Bordeaux folks still might, but they rack almost immediately. off of the lees to clean the wines up early and
But you leave them
yeah,
on there
a little bit more volume.
So, tell me more about this philosophy, because after all, you got the philosophy major, this minimalistic philosophy. I think you've alluded to it, but if you want to speak more to it,
Well, getting back to the whole idea of, if you want something to reflect where it's grown, again, trying not to get in the way.
Right.
Again, the analogy with the chef, Bianco, great ingredients. You just don't screw it up.
Right.
Don't do too much.
If you've got a quality ingredient at the base would be the wine grape, then why work it too much?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
okay.
Don't overseason, just like trying to overseason, get too crazy with something that is great on its own or with, minimal preparation. Yeah, it's the same exact idea.
Awesome. So you've been at this for quite some time. You're treated as a pioneer even though you're still young.
Oh, 59 is not that young. But,
that's pretty young. Younger than my age. How do you incorporate sustainability practices in your vineyard management and winemaking? And what innovations have you explored to mitigate any risks like the frost and the drought? What's new? What's sustainable and also what's new?
Well, sustainability in Arizona means water.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Rational irrigation. We've been doing, soil moisture probes. Actually, man, for a long time. Start out with tensiometers, which are so outdated now, it's crazy, but much more sophisticated probes, and just trying to use exactly as much water as we need to, and not overdo it.
Yeah.
Or underdo it. Obviously, that can be a problem too. But yeah, I think that's as you know, the Wilcox Basin and all the legislation that's proposed or not proposed yet. But yeah, it's a big deal. And I think, again, there is no other input that's more problematic than water.
I remember, so we talk about soil monitors now, and they're kind of, digital. You can check them, you can have them
on your phone,
and then you can check them on your phone. Well, in Dad's era of farming, 60s, 70s, 80s, it was he had a metal soil probe that was always with him in the back of his truck. And I remember when we'd hop in the truck with him, just checking the fields and everything. He was always turning that thing and pulling out, and it had that little cylinder at the end where you could see the line of dirt, and he'd rub it between his fingers, and sometimes he'd put it up to his nose to smell it because he just loved the smell of earth. And it was that stands so clear in my mind. And here now we have these we can monitor it on our smartphones, but technology has really advanced in improved farming. But I like, to your point, there's nothing sustainable if we don't have water here in Arizona.
No.
And we do a really good job of growing a lot of diverse crops, but it's scary to think what's going on with water, and hopefully we can mitigate some of this drought.
Yeah. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned, but everything is drip.
Yes, that's true. Especially with vines. Drip is complicated, but it works really well with vines. And I think part of it is because they're not subsurface drip most of the time, right? It's usually above.
Yes, usually above. Dick Erath from Oregon, winemaker from way back, one of the pioneers of Oregon winemaking, had put a vineyard in Wilcox years ago. He passed away a little while ago, but Todd and Kelly own that, and Descobasis own that vineyard now. But he originally, and I think they are still submerged. They're still buried drip. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. He's the only person there. I think they're the only ones that I'm aware of that do that.
Have done it that way.
But it does help with evaporation because you're basically getting none, at least when you're applying it. Yeah. That
is true. So let's talk about your wines. You've got Claire's, you've got Padres. Those two that I just mentioned are known for their complex blends. Can you share your approach to blending grape varieties and how you decide on proportions to achieve your desired flavors? I mean, that's when you can kind of play, especially if you're playing with a blend. In other words, there's more than one grape variety
Right.
within that that's going to be put in that bottle. Is there a, is it always 60% this, 20% this? I mean, how do you come to the percentages that you play with?
So in, again, evolution. So take Claire's, for instance, named after my youngest daughter. We have 4 daughters, Lisa and I, between us.
Okay.
So all of whom have their own wine.
Awesome.
And a granddaughter now who's got her own wine, Eloise, a white. But taking Claire's, so Claire's used to be based on Mourvedre. So there's a, say Mourvedre is a great variety from the south of France. There's some great producers who use Mourvedre as the base for their, at least one of their top of the line wines. So in this case, that was the original idea. The field that the Mourvedre was in eventually became interplanted with other varieties. When I needed to, I would put something else in there. So that wine eventually became a single plot, but it had 3 or 4 different varieties in it.
Okay.
So that is actually an interesting one way to do a blend is actually co-ferment. It's called a field blend.
Oh.
And Lisa's, which is named after my wife, is also a field blended white.
Blend.
Yeah. So they're all interplanted. Yeah. So a lot of the old Zinfandel vineyards in California were field blends. You'd have Petit Syrah in there. You'd have all kinds of Alicante Boucher, and in some cases, Ridge, a great producer, found out that they actually did a count of the different varieties in one of their several of their most famous vineyards, and they don't even meet the threshold to be called Zinfandel, so they had to start calling them basically red blends from Lytton Springs or Geyserville or whatever. But kind of funny. But yeah, I mean, that's the whole idea. And there are some pros and cons. A lot of people, myself included, think that they make really more cohesive, more interesting wines if you co-ferment.
Okay.
If they're picked and fermented together.
Together.
As opposed to making them separately, picking them separately, and then blending later.
Yeah, okay. Oh, way cool.
But that's what we do with Padres. So that's not a field blend. So that's a completely, what more traditional way. More traditional thing. So when you're doing that, so it's a Spanish influenced blend. So Tempranillo, Graciano, the primary components. Okay. And then the other wines going into that would be just, get a 100 milliliter beaker and figure out, just start doing trial blends and see what works and what doesn't. And generally, it's pretty obvious. It takes a little while, but you can find to your palate what the best blend is.
And usually, is there a base, like a strong base to blended wine? Like it might be, I can't even think, but like maybe the base is Syrah, and then whatever you build around that.
That's what I mean by Tempranillo and Graciano being a bit. Yeah, they're the foundation of the wine, generally speaking, and then try and bring in other things that make the wine more complex and more complete.
And you really sometimes have to work at it. But I've also heard someone say that they feel like Arizona does a really good job of some of the blended wines that you blend. Right. Why do you think that is?
Because of vintage variation.
What does that mean, though?
No, every year every harvest is different. Every growing season is different, and markedly so. You can't largely because of the monsoon season. So we can have, say, we have 8 inches of rain. In what is June 15th? I've forgotten when it technically ends now, but say you get 8 inches in 2 years in a row. You have a cool start to the season like we did this year, and then it got hot, and then you get 8 inches, but it's early, say, and I don't know, by August 10th, it's basically over with. Mm-hmm. That's a completely different harvest than if that 8 inches falls
Okay.
in middle of August through September.
And that's why for us that celebrate wine, we need to celebrate it because again, we're have that year's varieties and variations is going to make that year distinct.
Right.
And it can be tasted in the bottle if you become a connoisseur.
Yeah, try them side by side, two different vintages.
Right. The Callaghan Vineyard's favorite bottle of wine, whatever it is that we might pick.
Yeah, and there are some years where it's not good enough.
So you don't...
we don't make Padres every year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in fact, 19 was the last one I made.
Oh.
So 23 we'll make one, but yeah, that's not something that, you know, other wines like varietal wines. My thinking is that our best wines, generally speaking, are blends, and then the wines that don't make it into the blend might be bottled as varietal wines.
Okay.
And less expensive.
Less expensive.
Yeah.
What's your take on the current status of the Arizona wine industry? Whether it's the economic scope of it, or like we have 120 different, I don't know if that's winemakers or wine.
Yeah, there are some people that have wine made in like a custom crush situation type deal. But yeah, I think there are 120. Yeah, something. There might be more than that. Actually.
Okay.
120-ish active licenses that, you know, so selling wine under some business type business organization. But yeah, the industry has grown a lot just in the last, I keep forgetting what year it is. It's going to say 10 years, thinking back to 2010, it's 15 years. But yeah, huge amount of growth, a lot more money involved. Yeah, it's grown quite a bit. And again, it really will matter how this, Wilcox is, you know, it produces most of the fruit in the state. And depending on what happens in that area, basically the growth of the industry will be directly impacted. So if it's shut down, INA or AMA, then if that sticks, if the AMA sticks, that'll effectively take care. There will be no growth for a while. Maybe up north and a little bit here, but in terms of easily expandable acreage, that's really the source for it.
Wow. Yeah. You don't feel like we could also be oversaturated as small as we are as an ag state with too many licenses, or?
Well, I think that some of the problem is directly related to marketing, and as you know, I think you're getting at consumer awareness and support.
Hence the reason I'm doing this series.
Yeah. No, there's no question that it's lagging. Arizona wine industry has not done a particularly good job of, and I include myself here, we need to do a much better job of getting the word out. Because we do have, you know, we've increasingly had more champions for the industry. But there's a long way to go.
Yeah.
And especially in on-premise restaurant.
Right.
Inclusion. We need Texas chauvinism here in Arizona. So
I agree with that. Yeah. But it is totally doable, and I'll use my colleague Joel Carr as an example, because you have to say, Joel, off camera, who helps me make all this work, you have to confess that you didn't know that much about wine, and you certainly didn't know about Arizona wine, and you love it.
Yeah, I've learned a lot from doing these last 8 interviews with Julie, and I didn't know that you could even grow wine really in the desert, and so I kind of learned about that and how each region has, like you guys are mentioning, up north it's more fruit flavored, forward, and then down here it's the opposite. So that's very intriguing to learn. So it'd be fun to get one from each region and sample them and he's try to tell which way they're from.
And Joel's been trying some of the wines too, and you're young, so, and that's one of the marketing profiles that we've got to work on a little bit better, because I've also heard that the really young guns aren't drinking the wine like you and I used to drink.
Right. Yeah. They have a lot of other options.
Yeah. And everybody always had their beer, especially college, but and I do think as we mature
Yeah, there you go.
that maybe we get more sophisticated. But what I celebrate about Arizona's wines is the fact that it's such a value added crop, and it is an ag, product. So working for the Arizona Farm Bureau, Joel and I we're not forced to celebrate it, but we are going to celebrate it because I love a glass. Because I love a glass of wine. So you've got obviously several decades under your belt at Callaghan Vineyards, and you have new releases, and you've got family history, and you're a wildcat, because you graduated from the U of A.
No, I didn't actually.
Oh, okay.
So Lisa's family has 4 generations of graduates.
Oh,
I have
cool
3.
Okay.
But I didn't go down.
Okay.
Little graduate school, but never.
Yeah. How do you envision then the future of your winery and this legacy that the Callaghan family has developed? We definitely need to give credit to your mom and dad. And what do you hope to leave for Arizona, for the wine industry, and maybe the next generation, your daughters or any of them kind of showing?
Yeah. I think Waverly, Lisa's youngest daughter.
Oh, cute.
She also has a wine.
I love all their
very popular wine.
Okay.
But I think she might be. But it's not something, I've thrown it out there to them, but you want to, they need to want to do it, and not just feel obligated. Because that's not something we want. We want somebody who loves to do it, what we're doing. So. And
it's not easy. I mean,
no.
Agriculture in general is not easy. Wine grape growing and all of the things that you guys have to deal with just the weather alone. And then you're making that value added by making wine out of your wine grapes. So this is not an easy life.
Yeah. No, it's fun though.
It's fun.
When you have a bad day, you can do barrel samples. So,
a bad day, you can have barrel samples. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, any other last thoughts or encouragement for our viewers? So by the way, Joel, did we get any live today?
Live questions?
No, but just people live.
We had a few people join, and even someone wanted to kind of join in and request to join into the live. But
shoot.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, we normally don't do that because I don't want to get us all bogged down. But for what happens is that we'll have a handful on the low end, maybe a couple dozen on the live, but most of the viewing happens afterwards. And then just for our viewers, just know that we will also put it on Arizona Farm Bureau's website at azfb.org, and that's within our news and information section on the website. We have a whole commitment to profile some of these series, and in this case, the wine series that we've done. And Kent, thank you so much for letting me steal your time.
Oh, thanks for coming out. Thanks for the shout out or the support. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. And it will continue at a minimum on that weekend when I want a glass of a good Arizona wine.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, everyone.